Welcome to another deep dive episode of the Compass Christian Church Weekly Sermon Podcast. This is where we will dig deeper into the content from Sunday's sermon, consider even more ways of thinking about the Bible and how to live it, and encourage one another to follow Jesus more closely together. I'm your host, Will Barlow. Let's dive in. Welcome back to another deep dive. My name is Will Barlow, and I have the pleasure today of sitting down with Amanda Dunn. Before I get into the conversation I had with Amanda, we do talk about community, and we talk about Unitarians that are spread out and who desire community. And so we mentioned a couple of different options. One of them is Salt and Light Study Night. I just wanted to put this information here at the beginning for those who are interested. Feel free to message me on Facebook or message Anna Brown on Facebook, or you can send an email to salt.light.studynight@gmail.com. There's also ways that you can get involved with Allegiance to the King, and there are other ministries out there that also have virtual fellowships as well if you're interested in that. So there are options out there for you if you're isolated and alone. And of course, I'm also a big fan of starting your own home fellowship and working with the resources, for example, that Living Hope International Ministries is putting out, Forge Bible studies, and things like that. So lots of resources out there for you if you're desiring to build community. Without any further ado, here's my conversation with Amanda Dunn. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another deep dive episode. I'm excited to have Amanda Dunn with us today. Amanda, thanks so much for taking the time to sit down with me and also for preaching last week. I'd like to start with the same question I ask everyone when we have these interviews, and that is, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yes, I grew up out west, so Kentucky is not my native land, you could say. I'm from out west. I grew up there in a pretty great family and in a Christian home, and lived a lot of life out there. I loved Idaho so much I swore I would never leave until I met my husband, my now husband, and we got married, and I left about 6 months later. And so began an odyssey of our military and foster care years, after which we went back to Idaho for a while, and then had the opportunity to move out to Kentucky and become a part of Compass. And it's an opportunity we had to say yes to.
Yeah, I remember in some part we can blame Mark Kane for all of this because, and I can say this because I know you're close with Mark and I'm friends with Mark
Yeah.
too. So
Yeah.
we could throw him directly under the bus. I think he would own up to this. I think he would want to own this. But yeah, I mean, I remember when I first met you, it was at the UCA conference. And I remember, I still to this day, I would say religiously listen to the Unitarian Christian Alliance podcast that Mark does. And I find so many of the stories, the interviews that he does so compelling. And yours was one of the ones that really resonated with me. And so I got to the UCA conference, found out that you were there, and was like, I have to meet this Amanda Dunn. And so you got somewhat similar experience to probably what Sean Finnegan felt at Converge back in 2019, where I just showed up and introduced myself to him, and he's like, I don't know who this guy is, so that's sort of how I recall it going, us meeting each other. As I walked up to you, I think maybe Anna was with me, I don't remember exactly. I think she was with me, and we were
I think Anna and John Brown were both with you.
Yeah, and we were just like, we all want to meet this Amanda Dunn. So he's like, zoom over to you and just started peppering you with questions, and you were very gracious. So that was sort of the beginning.
That was fun. That was such a fun weekend. The world opened up for me a bit that weekend. It had been my own faith journey to that point had been a long and wandering one. And I was not on the inside of the Unitarian community. I did not know anyone. we uh, we'd had the opportunity to be part of a wonderful church in San Diego
Hmm.
for many of the years we were there, but they were not Unitarian, and they did not know of the Unitarian community. Um, but when the UCA launched, it was in a time when we were back in Idaho, and I was feeling distinctly lonely for a really transparent community. And especially where we were there, that transparency was hard to have
Hmm.
um, through some of those doctrinal differences. And so that's when I discovered the UCA podcast. And like you, I found a lot of the stories really compelling. And my conversation with Mark was also honestly very compelling and motivating. I got done, and I think about 20 minutes later, I started to completely panic and was like, wait, what? I totally forgot that everything I was telling him was going to be broadcasted to anyone who wanted to listen. He's
Right.
good at
Yeah.
that. Mark,
Yeah.
you're good at that. Yeah. Then I had so enjoyed listening to all these stories, and I told him that, and he said, "You just have to come. You just have to come to the UCA convention." It was
Hmm.
the first one, and I was aching for community. So I went hoping to meet people with whom we could build community somehow. No idea how that would work,
Hmm.
and I did. I met a ton of people, but I met you guys, and I learned about Salt and Light
Hmm.
that you guys were doing at that time, and that was like really like step one. I think you made a joke about we could always move to Kentucky, and you were 100% joking, but I was immediately not 100% joking. Um, and so then it just kind of planted a seed, and it from
Mm.
there I think it was a matter of time.
Yeah, and I remember, later in the game too, we had the Allegiance to the King event in Paducah that you came in for, and you guys were on the edge of deciding, that was like the summer,
Yeah,
the go no go decision. And
yeah,
I think you were concerned. I don't remember exactly all the concerns, but there were a ton. I mean, you're moving halfway across the country. You've got four boys, all of whom are
yeah.
so tied into their social network, their community, in-person community there in Idaho, where
Mm-hmm.
your family is. I mean, you've got every
Mm-hmm.
reason to not leave. And I remember, I think you let me off the hook when you left. You're like, look, I don't know what's going to happen, but I would just assume that we're not coming. And I was like, that's fine. Like, we're thankful. We're thankful to know you. We're thankful if we could be a resource for you, like whatever. I'm not a hard salesman on this stuff. I feel strongly about leadership and about how much control people can influence, because I've had control influenced over me religiously before
Yeah,
in abusive ways. So I try to color inside those lines and not step outside those at all. And so when you told me that, I was just like, okay, that's great. Like it was all stress off for me. It was like, look, we've shown her who we are, and we've shown her what's available here, and I feel very comfortable that she knows what she's getting into, at least on some level. Although I think there were details that none of us knew, right? That's the way it
yeah.
always
There's
is with
just
life.
That's
Yeah.
right. There's things you just can't know. There's
Yeah.
things you can't know. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I think I came out. That event was also incredible. And then I got to come and visit Louisville afterward,
Hmm.
and I had a blast. I so badly wanted my family to know all of you and for you to
Mm.
know my family. But I also knew that, yeah, you're right. We had a million reasons to stay right where we were.
Hmm.
And Zach, having not met anyone in person,
Right.
um, felt real hesitant about the cost. And I think
Yes.
financial was actually the very last concern
Right.
he had. It
Yeah.
usually is. But the other costs. And then this is how he works, like a switch flipped overnight. It's like I woke up to a husband who was always going to move to Kentucky. And I was like, we should visit first. So we did. We came back and visited, and it was interesting. I could see, if I'm honest, I was simultaneously so excited about what was going on, so behind it,
Mm.
so not wanting to miss out if God had work for us to do in that, ways for us to help, and yet also nothing specific at all. I could just look. It's like when I came out with Zach that July, I could look into the next year and see that this was going to be extremely difficult and that I was not prepared.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't really think about the future. So he wasn't worried about those things.
Right. Yeah.
He was like, next steps. And so that's what we did. And I'm so thankful for that balance in us because I
Mm-hmm.
might honestly, even though I was the one that originally really wanted to move and brought it to him and we prayed about it together, was kind of waiting for him to get on board. Once he was, and it was a yes, I was pretty afraid of what it was going to cost, not just us, but a lot of people we loved,
Mm-hmm.
especially our children. I was all in and terrified, I think is the best way to say it. So
Yeah.
yeah, that it was in that state of mind that we did it. We moved, but
Mm-hmm.
we were my eyes were wide open. I definitely didn't come thinking, oh, this is going to be just so great. I think we
Right.
had left Coronado several years before moving to Idaho, and that is what we thought. We thought this is just a giant homecoming where it will be wonderful and easy. And
Right.
there were a lot of good things in those years, but that was not true. And so
Mm.
maybe our eyes were just more open as well. Moving is hard.
Mm-hmm.
Building community is hard. And
Totally.
so we kind of knew a little bit what we were in for that way.
Yeah, I think that's such an important thing for people, especially people outside who are watching sort of the experiment that is Compass and
Mm.
wondering, like, is it worth it to move to start a new
Yeah.
church? Is it worth it to uproot my family and change jobs or uproot my children or whatever the case might be to join into larger Unitarian communities?
Mm.
And I would say that it is worth it, but I would say that if you think that it's just going to solve all of your problems, it's this like magic bullet, then you've got another story coming to you.
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of what we're going to talk about today about the stuff that you've been meditating in, I know as a pastor, and in fact, I'm going to say this on this upcoming Sunday. I'm not an expert at everything, and I can't be an expert at everything spiritually. I mean, it's just not available for anyone to be an expert at everything spiritually except for Jesus. Jesus was the one who
Mm-hmm.
is expert at everything. Um,
Yeah.
and so we need people in our communities that fill these different roles. And I think when I saw you and your husband, I saw a lot of quality, but I didn't know exactly what we were getting. And I would say a lot of
Mm-hmm.
what we've gotten, at least in the beginning, and I'm not trying to pigeonhole you in the future and like what your role will look like going forward and all that stuff. But to me, one of the great values that y'all have provided to our community, and what the things that we're going to talk about today is your incredible reflection on community and about openness and transparency and about really being a part of someone's life and what that practically feels like, looks like, how to manage all of that on a very very personal level. Because
Mm.
I'm not historically speaking the most touchy feely, in touch with my emotions kind of person. I'm really working hard on that now.
I know
But
you are.
yeah,
We see it.
but anyway, that brings me actually to our next question, which is Kurt Thompson. Early in your sermon, you mentioned the
Mm.
name Kurt Thompson. Would you like to share more about how you came across his work and what it is that he's focuses on and how it influenced the things that you talked about in your sermon?
Well, the road to Kurt Thompson. I entered motherhood, and not just motherhood. Motherhood was just that like most intimate of relationships where the way I interacted, my choices were so quickly reflected right back at me so that I could really see the
Mm-hmm.
ramifications of my words or of my attitude.
Mm-hmm.
This is not just applicable to motherhood; it's applicable to all relationships. But motherhood taught this to me. I thought I really had good rules of engagement for how to be in relationship with people because the system in which I had been raised in, that had always, I thought, worked quite well. It didn't work well in parenting, for me. I was okay with, for a long time, I had beliefs. I thought, you know what, there's limits on every relationship. sooner or later, somebody's right, somebody's wrong. The wrong person can't accept it because obviously I'm the right person. And so the wrong person goes away, right?
Yeah.
I thought that rupture, I knew about rupture. I knew rupture was an inevitable part of relationship, but I did not know yet. And maybe this was taught to me and I just didn't see it, but I did not know yet in a practical, embodied way about repair.
Mm.
And my first big humbling experience with that was actually when we began foster care. We went through some training and then we were given a set of rules about how to parent in our home if we were going to be a foster family that kind of took away my operating system. It
Mm.
disabled it. It didn't
Mm.
work anymore. And at first I was angry. And then I realized, you know what? Obviously, there's other operating systems out there. Why am I so resistant, so afraid
Mm.
to considering other ways? And so I had a friend who was really knowledgeable in early childhood development, who was very gracious to me. And she recommended a couple of Dr. Dan Siegel's books. He is not a Christian, but he coined the term interpersonal neurobiology.
Mm.
And his books didn't just help me be a better foster parent. They changed my approach first with all of my children, and then with my husband, and then with my friends. I began to realize, oh, we're shaping each other's brains,
Mm.
not just attitudes, our physical brains by the way we interact with each other.
Mm.
And um, there are there are ways in which we can approach each other that make there's a way I can approach my child that makes him more open to changing.
Mm.
So I got really involved there. Then obviously foster care brought along with it not necessarily my own stories of big trauma, but people I loved, people
Mm.
I grew to love deeply, stories of big trauma. And I started trying to understand them. And so I ended up in the work of Dan Allender for a while, who also he does narrative story work for healing trauma. And then one day I heard him interview Kurt Thompson.
Mm.
And he kept saying things that I was like, he's talking about Dr. Siegel's stuff. He's talking about interpersonal neurobiology. How does he know this? Well, he's a good friend of Dan Siegel. He's a colleague of Dan Siegel, and he's a Christian.
Mm.
And so he took a lot of Dan Siegel's work, but for him, he sees it most clearly and it is most true in light of the gospel of the kingdom
Mm.
that Jesus preached. And I started listening, I think, first to his podcasts and then read some of his books. And it took off a lot of filters that I'd worn for a long time that I
Mm.
didn't know I had
Mm.
on.
Yeah. I mean, I know I've experienced that recently in conversations that I've had with my wife and other people, that, the way that we grew up, the way that we always did things, it becomes the filter for our reality. And
Mm-hmm.
then it's like the only obvious thing. It's like, I was thinking about this, just this past Sunday, we had Pentecost, and it's like there is prototypical Pentecost sermon for the people from our,
Mm-hmm.
from our shared faith experience. It's like
Mm-hmm.
there's 5 options or so, but you're basically telling the same story. And there are many ways to tell the story of Pentecost. There are
Mm-hmm.
plenty of people outside of our faith tradition that would never even consider our story as being like the obvious one to tell about Pentecost.
Right.
And so it's funny when you think about religious experience, when you think about faith communities, when you think about even like you said, families, just like husband-wife relationship, parent-children dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
There are things that seem so obvious to us, and the reason they seem obvious to us is because that's how we were raised. and
That's
that
right.
might and
This
that
is
might sound
obviously the truth.
right. Yeah, and that might sound obvious to people listening, but I think we're trying to be meta about this in this conversation, that's like, no, you actually have to sit there and consider, maybe there's a better way of doing this, or maybe there's another way of doing this that's equally valid. And um anyway, it's interesting because you start paying attention to the way that you react and you experience different emotions. And I know I've been working on that a lot recently. But I think I told you recently that, when I'm tempted to experience anger with my children, like the knee jerk reaction is to get angry and immediately blow up and respond, react, not to think. And what I've been trying to do more recently is just like calm down and just like watch myself, like almost like if you have like a heart monitor and you're watching the lines on the screen go up and
Mm-hmm.
down when your heart beats, right? You watch
Mm-hmm.
like, here's my knee jerk reaction, there's the emotion that I should be experiencing, and oh, I can tell where that's going to lead. And you
Mm-hmm.
can watch it sort of dispassionate and be like, I'm going to choose to not do that. And anyway,
Amazing.
it's difficult though. It's not easy.
Oh my
It's not,
gosh.
I
So
say that it doesn't
difficult.
happen every time like that, right? That's the way I wish it would
That's right.
happen. But I think the work that you're talking about is it's difficult work for us to look back at, especially those of us who feel like we had such wonderful childhoods, to look back and be like, well, maybe I can do better, not in a haughty sense, but maybe there's a way to reach my children that's going to be more effective than the way that I was parented or the way I was reached. Or, we meet people on the street or people who want, we're trying to teach the gospel to. Maybe the way that we were taught the gospel or the line that we're going to take, maybe that doesn't communicate well to them. And so we need to be
Mm-hmm.
flexible. We need to be ready
Mm-hmm.
for God to lead us in a different way. And so I think that's all really, really helpful stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that one interesting thing that I realized is one of the reasons I took those things for granted is
Mm.
that they worked well for me.
Right.
I was a child for whom it worked well. I
Right.
I was a rule follower. I was
Hmm.
an achiever to the extent that I wanted to please.
Right.
I wanted to be good more than anything else in the world. I wanted to be good. So if you think about, a culture that says just follow these rules, be good, you know, be successful, like this, I
Mm.
did really well. But then
Hmm.
coming into relationship with other people, parenting children who don't react that way to
Hmm.
that operating system, it opened my eyes and it just
Hmm.
made me ask questions. And I think we have to be careful because I'm not out there saying, and now we've found the one true way.
No. No.
Not at all. And I think Kurt Thompson himself would severely caution against that. I
Yeah.
think he's saying, here's a tool, here's another way we can understand some of these promises we find in scripture. I find that the further I get into my faith walk, into life, into parenting, it just serves me so much better, it serves the people around me so much better to be curious instead of certain.
Hmm.
The more time I can spend being curious instead of just so sure I've got it figured out. Um, it seems like that keeps me tender
Hmm.
and it keeps my relationships open.
Hmm. Yeah, you keep the door open both for other people and for God too
Yeah.
when you're
Yeah.
curious and humble. Yeah. Well, we're going to transition to homeschooling a little bit. Many know that you
Okay.
homeschool your children thanks to our good
I
friend
do.
Mark Kane. As someone who homeschools, you know that each of your children learns things in different ways. And I have a teaching background. For those of you that don't know that, I used to teach secondary education, taught middle school and high school math for a while. And like you point out earlier, there are things that you fit into well because the system matched your learning style or the
Mhm.
system matched the way that
Mhm.
you were naturally inclined to process things and think about things. And I think that's the same thing for me. I grew up in school and was great at school, like, but then you find out later, oh wait, the people that didn't do as well in school, maybe it wasn't just that they were like lacking in intelligence or weren't working hard. Maybe
Right.
it was because school was designed for people like me that process information like I do. And there's
Right.
all these other ways of processing information, and those are all equally valid ways of processing information. So I think what was fascinating, we had a conversation recently where you told me that you found out recently that you've discovered that you have multiple learning styles, that there was sort of this traditional way that you learned and processed information, and you thrived in those environments. But then you found out recently that there are these other ways that you've engaged in recently, and you found even as compelling, or maybe it's probably the right.
Yeah.
Would you like to
Yeah.
elaborate a little bit more on that?
I've learned a lot in the last few years about, the way our brains work for various reasons, the needs of
Mm.
my own children,
Mm-hmm.
my desire to, I get fascinated sometimes by comments my kids will make that to me feel like out of left field.
Mm-hmm.
Or when I would hear people talk about parts of scripture sometimes, and I would think, boy, they're not looking at this the same way I am, for
Mm-hmm.
sure.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even sure they have the same goals as they're reading it as I am. And there's a temptation to be defensive there and to think,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I think I've got the right way, though.
Mm-hmm.
We better be pretty careful with this Bible because it's delicate. We wouldn't want to break it by not looking at it the right way. Well,
Mm-hmm.
then I actually, I had a pastor say several years ago in a sermon the exact opposite, and that no one had ever told me that. It was just sort of a belief I held.
Mm-hmm.
But he said the exact opposite. He said the Bible is sturdy. Push on it, lean on it, think of it from different perspectives. It felt like permission. It felt like permission to think, I would say, more creatively. No one had ever told me I couldn't think creatively
Mm-hmm.
about the Bible. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying I had never seen it modeled.
Mm-hmm.
You could go so far as a very specific Bible storybook, maybe, but I think I carried within me this belief that the Bible was mainly a source text,
Mm-hmm.
the text to which I went to mine out the proof for my beliefs,
Right.
and that needed to be dismantled in me,
Mm-hmm.
in my heart. One of the things that complicated that was that I was a debater. I loved source text.
Right.
I I liked memorizing things. I liked always having a quick answer for people. And so it took a long time. And that was honestly a long road that probably started with, like, I would say my great humiliation,
Mm.
my great humbling at the start of my marriage. And then the realities of being a mom
Mm.
and not having the time to do word studies or take copious notes, or to just sit and read uninterrupted.
Mm.
It changed. I remember hearing an analogy that it really, I don't remember where I heard this. It was in someone's sermon or Bible teaching somewhere. They really opened up how I approached Bible reading. And that was this story of a man who goes into his pastor's office one day and says, "You know what? I've read the Bible. I don't understand it. I've tried to memorize it. I don't remember it. I'm done. I give up. It's just too complicated." And his pastor said, "I'm so sorry to hear that. Will you take this basket and go fill it with some water, please?" Hands him a basket. The man thinks he's crazy, but he thinks, okay. So he goes into the church kitchen and he tries to fill the basket with water. Obviously, it doesn't fill. It's a basket, it's woven. Um, he tries for a while. He goes back and he hands it to his pastor. He says, it doesn't work. I ran it and I ran water in it for minutes and it didn't fill at all. And the pastor said, exactly, but it's a lot cleaner, isn't it? And there was an invitation
Mm.
in that to see the Bible so differently, and that it wasn't about what I know or what I could remember or argue. It was about what the Bible was doing to my heart, what the Word of God, these letters of love, these histories of these magnificent people, what
Mm.
immersing myself in them would do to me over time. So that was kind of the beginning. And then more recently, I have learned that some of my kids learn
Hmm.
really differently than I learn. Um, I'm teaching one of my children how to read right now. The method that we found that's working for him blows my mind. I would never have been able to understand
Hmm.
it. It would have left me completely confused. But after a year of trying my way and failing, I was like, help. I got help. And people who understood these different ways gave me some help in a book. And this book is magnificent.
Hmm.
He needed a different approach. And what that is he's it has largely to do with hemispheres of the brain.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of us, our culture is very biased. It privileges right-brained people.
Hmm.
Um, and that's partly, it's not on purpose. There's no grand scheme. It's just that we live in this age of data and technology
Hmm.
and information. But people who are more left-brained, and there's a lot more complexities to it than just that.
Sure.
But there are plenty of people who don't think in words. They think in images, they think in
Hmm.
colors or senses. And for me, this was very exciting to learn because it felt like an invitation. In the last 5 or 6 years, one of the things that's happened for me is and this probably happened a lot sooner for a lot of people, but I encountered sentiments, messages I wanted to communicate, and I could not, despite loving words, I could not communicate them with words. It
Hmm.
wasn't enough. And so for me, I grew up in a musical family. I've always loved music. Music was the first place I turned because sometimes you can put words to music and it says something more, something different than what you would just read if you read them aloud.
Hmm.
Even then experiencing out of necessity, wanting to spend more time reading the Bible, but knowing I didn't have time. I was so excited when I found the Dwell app several years ago. And at first it was just practical, but then over time it became beautiful and something I crave because I can listen to different people and I wonder about not just about their accents, about their life stories. Why are
Hmm.
they emphasizing this sentence the way that they are? What is it they're seeing right now? And I don't know all of that, but I can hear a lot of it in their inflection. And that eventually led me even to just listening to the Bible set to music,
Hmm.
and soaking in it. And it became so much less about what I know and so much more about who I'm becoming.
Hmm.
The only problem then is if I'm supposed to say in words what that is. Finally, I can relate to people, right? I can relate to people who this has been their experience.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, no, I remember having a similar experience with worship music, and it sounds silly to say it now because I've experienced it now for about 7 or 8 years. But I remember, we grew up. I grew up in an environment where music was to prepare your heart for the teaching, for the message.
Mm-hmm.
It was not so much about necessarily praising or worshiping God, although they the group I affiliated with wouldn't have said it's not for that. They would have said it is for that. But
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
oftentimes at the church service, it would have been entirely performative, where it's like you weren't expected to sing along, even though you knew the words. You were not expected to sing along, like engage your body in any way. You're just sort of it was performative.
Mm-hmm.
You were watching them do something, and a lot of the lyrics were honestly, in hindsight, more self-serving about like how we do things and less about what God's doing and his power and his awesomeness. And so, and I grew up sort of steeped in that kind of a musical environment.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like you come out into the contemporary Christian music scene, which, there are good, really great songs out there. There are songs I don't like out there. There's
Mm-hmm.
hit or
Sure.
miss,
Sure.
style
Yes.
and content and all the above. But I found myself, I forget exactly how it happened, but I think I was just one day in my car and I was I was singing along, and I realized I was like worshiping God, and
Mm,
there was an emotional response. There was a
wow.
feeling that I felt that I had never felt before.
Yeah.
And it was like, whoa, this is like the presence of God. It's not like I hadn't experienced it before in other situations, because I had.
Right.
Not quite
Right.
like that. But I experienced similar things. But there was like this whole other um it's like when you're playing a video game and you're like, oh, there's like this secret level that I never knew about. And like now the map
Yes.
that I thought was complete, there's like this whole other section of the map that just like unlocks and opens up. It's like this whole other part of my life that now could exist. And so
Wow.
now I lean into that more. And I'm thankful for that. And again, I don't think anything we're saying is like our childhood was deficient. It's just like literally like no set of parents. We're not going to be the kind of parents that gives our
No.
kids a universal religious
Mm,
positive experience, and they're going to know
no.
everything and experience everything at our hands by the time they leave our
No.
house. I wish that were true, but it's not. I don't think we're even going to
Yeah.
experience everything on this side of the kingdom. So, it's just one of those things. We're
Right.
experience what we experience. But yeah, I think this is all really powerful, powerful stuff about, again, being open and humble and curious and leaning into new ways of experiencing God, and not just this head knowledge of God or spiritual
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. It's such a good point. And it's so interesting because for me, I think because my dad was a musician and we were surrounded by musicians that weren't all from the same faith background,
Mm-hmm.
because we were pretty honestly like isolated and at a certain point just kind of going our own way. I didn't know how to do was how to engage in a church service and worship and feel comfortable. I
Mm-hmm.
did not know how to do that. But what I was invited to often, in my childhood, that I carried with me into adulthood, that was really a gift, um, was, my dad playing Amazing Grace in the living room
Mm.
and singing his heart out
Mm.
and knowing there was more to it.
Mm-hmm.
Or around, I loved campfires because that sometimes it wasn't worship music, sometimes it was Desperado, which to this day is one of my favorite songs, but it became like it became a prayer for me in a lot of
Mm.
ways, crying out to God. And so there was always this emotional connection, but I did have this belief that, but I don't want to be unreasonable in my faith. So I need to, it's like there had to be this line there, a safety
Right.
net, because I don't want to let emotions
Right.
affect my intellectual faith. And I think feeling eventually invitation and then permission and then experiencing the fusion of those things, I needed it. I needed
Mm-hmm.
it. And it has been life changing for
Mm-hmm.
me.
For sure. Yeah. I want to transition a little bit. We've been talking a lot about personal spiritual experience, and there's always two sides to that coin, right? There is the personal side where all I can do is take care of me. All you can do is take care of you. I can't
Mhm.
dictate to even my wife or my kids exactly how they're going to live their lives, right? So, but I know you and I both have been reflecting a lot, and of course, a lot of the people in Compass have been reflecting a lot about the importance of community and what community looks like, how to build healthy community.
Mhm.
Um, and one of the things that's been really on my heart a lot recently is I always understood community growing up as very important and very helpful for a lot of things, for mutual encouragement, for education. I would say in the last couple of years, I've seen increasingly the importance of worship as a community, personal worship, like I just mentioned, a couple minutes ago, but also corporate worship.
Mhm.
Um, but there is this other aspect to community that I've really seen a lot in the last year and a half or 2 years as we've been on this journey with Compass, and that is that community is like a refining fire too. That there's this aspect to community that's it from the outside it looks dangerous, and it is dangerous. It's because it is dangerous. It's dangerous
It
to where
is.
we are currently, our current way of living. And In your sermon, you talked about pruning, which I think is essentially a very similar, if not basically identical idea to the refining fire.
Mhm.
So I'd love for you to share a little bit more about your thoughts on pruning and what that means in the context of Christian community, and then also comment on why people on the outside are not always interested about joining community. Is that, do you think, part of what leads to disinterest in joining community? I'm thinking specifically about isolated people in the Unitarian
Mm.
community who are like, yeah, that looks great, but that also looks really hard.
Mhm.
You think that may be part of the reason why people are not as interested in pulling the trigger and moving and doing this? I don't know. Maybe you have
Mm.
some thoughts on that.
Well, I can tell you that in my sermon, I commented, and it was not an exaggeration. I mean, I have sat in first it was just John 17, and then it was those expanded chapters truly for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And um not because I don't think it had to take a year. I think it took me a year. um and probably one of my hangups that I didn't see was the pruning. It
Mm-hmm.
was the pruning. Because for me, there's a part of me that understands pretty easily the cutting away of dead branches,
Mm-hmm.
right? Of sinful things, of unhealthy behaviors. Yes, of course. I want to be good. That's easy for me to accept.
Right. Yeah.
What's a lot harder to accept, and I think it's got to be in part, the cultural waters we swim in,
Mm.
is this idea that the love of God, it is his love, it is his care for us, will sometimes mean him coming very close and very tenderly cutting away things that are not bad,
Mm-hmm.
but that are not, they're not his will. They're
Mm-hmm.
not his will for us. And when I say that, I'm not just, he knows in a way we can't possibly know. This isn't the best way.
Mm-hmm.
What's really incredible to me about that kind of pruning is that God doesn't just do it. I think that type of pruning happens most often and probably most expansively in the life of the Jesus follower who is drawing close and asking
Mm-hmm.
to be transformed, to be matured.
Mm-hmm.
And this went against, it's funny, prosperity gospel, its roots are deep. Its roots are deep, and it is easy. Sometimes I think, I don't believe that, but then I find myself saying things like, but but I didn't do anything to deserve this.
Right. Yeah.
Or I deserved that. I
Right.
earned that. But all I have to do is step back. Parenting for me is such a gift, because if I step back and I think about the way I parent, the way that I try to shape my children, I might give one thing to one of my children that I know is not, even if
Mm.
it's attractive to another child, it's not what he needs most.
Right.
And my wisdom and my decision is not dependent upon his understanding. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, that is where we build the strength in our relationship, as I ask him to trust me and he places the trust in me.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember reading over and over again one of those quotes by Tom Wright,
Mm-hmm.
who when he said that the gardener is never closer in giving more care to the vine than when he comes close to prune.
Mm-hmm.
And he also said the thing that just blew my mind, and I don't, it's kind of embarrassing that it did, but it just blew my mind to read, is he says there will be good growth that needs to be cut away.
Mm-hmm.
And then studying what the context of vine keeping that we didn't have, that I didn't have, the
Mm-hmm.
background knowledge, and realizing, wait, a third of the good things that are produced in my life, but uh, I'm sitting in a place now where it looks so sweet.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that it's easy or that I'm always ready or willing. It's not that. But I think that the more we do it, the more we are willing to say, all right, God, I'm going to trust you. This is painful. I don't understand. I don't know why. I'm nervous about how long this process is going to be,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm going to trust you. Each time we do that, we have this God that does not let us down. And that does not mean he gives us what we want.
Right.
But time and time again, I am blown away about what I find on the other side. And sometimes the outcomes are more obvious and sometimes they're long. There's outcomes. I was just talking to my kids this morning. There are things that I have to choose to trust God with every day right now that I know I might not have answers to in this life. It came up. One of my boys, his eyes filled with shock at this realization he'd never had before. He said, wait, yeah, you guys, you don't have any girls. I said, you're right. You're right. I don't have any daughters.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just one part. It's not this gaping wound. It's not that, but I have questions.
Right.
We had dreams. We have longings, but I also can see I couldn't have known when we were in the midst of having babies and early childhood the the long-term strengths God was growing in us,
Mm-hmm.
or the ways in which my boys, my little band of boys, would be this blessing, and the way that that would bless me. It blows my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just one example, you know,
Mm-hmm.
but I was telling them, I said, I don't know, maybe one day one of you is going to have 4 girls and I'm just going to have this household full of granddaughters, or maybe not. Maybe one day there's a little girl. I'm an old granny and I foster some little girl and I
Mm-hmm.
get to pour into her all this love. Maybe not. Maybe God knows things about me I don't know. And so just trying to trust in those types of ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think parenting is such a good example of pruning. I know there are a lot of bad things have been pruned out of my life through parenting. A lot of
Yeah.
selfishness and a lot of other things.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
but no, I mean, it is a daunting thing. And um, I know I have a friend, and I won't name his name, but because I'll just share a little bit of a story. But he talked about this pruning a couple years ago in a meeting I was in, and one of the things he said was that he really at one point in his life really enjoyed singing in
Mm.
Christian meetings, and
Mm.
he said after one of the meetings, he was praying in his hotel room, I think it was, and God sort of said to him, what were you doing? And he goes, what do you mean? I was praising you, I was worshiping you. And he goes, uh, I didn't call you to do that. And
Wow.
and so then like he transitioned in his mind to like, I guess I'm not, I mean, he could sing, he could play guitar, right? He was
Yeah.
capable, but like God showed him like that's not where I need you to go. And look, this guy is the kind of guy that if God came back to him now, and I think God does this in seasons. It's not you're
100%.
never gonna sing or never gonna do this, right? It's this in this season you're not. He might end up doing something like that in the future. If God told him to do it, that's what he would do. He listens, and but that was a good thing that got pruned out of his life, at least for that period. And so when you think about pruning, and I think the image that you gave us was so great in your sermon, is that it's not just growth; it's growth in a specific direction and with a specific health
Yes.
in mind.
Yes.
And sometimes, you know, again, we're not going to experience all the wonderful things that God wants for us on this side of the kingdom, but if we're going to experience more of it, it's going to take us responding to His direction, His leading, and pruning is a huge part of that.
Well, and to respond to the other part, I think I only made it like a third of the way through your question. Sorry. Um, I first of all, I do think it can be daunting.
Mm,
I think it's a harder marketing challenge.
mm,
It's a lot easier to say follow Jesus and all your dreams will come true.
right. Yeah. If you wish
The-
upon a star.
yeah. That's but the problem is that's not the truth. That's not what we were told. That's not what Jesus said. And so when we tell people that, and then real life happens,
Right.
they are crushed.
Yeah.
And yeah, they get broken. And so I think telling the truth is hard. Although I do think there's a part of this you don't see until you're from the inside.
Mm-hmm.
I think the rugged individualism with
Mm-hmm.
which so many of us live proudly, it's a hard thing to let go of.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you, God went to work on my heart. He had a lot of work to do. I was just very confident in my own abilities
Mm-hmm.
and very sure, even with a family behind me, all that had been poured into me. I wanted to go and be self made as if that
Right.
was ever a possibility.
Mm.
And, it's a long story, but when I was finishing college, I went on a backpacking trip to Europe by myself. And I really didn't ask anybody what they thought. I didn't get any counsel on it. I didn't even pray about it. I just decided I was going to go and I just went. And it took like 3 days for everything to fall apart. Everything I took got stolen. My bank accounts were drained. I was a disaster. Um, it was over the 4th of July weekend. So everyone I knew was camping outside of cell range. Cell phones were
Mm.
brand new. And I was very alone.
Mm.
And it didn't matter. I'm a good talker. I'm good at talking. This is my. It didn't matter. The Irish didn't care. They were unimpressed. Um, and I had very quickly absolutely no choice but to rely upon other people.
Mm.
And that was not the. It was not. That was the very beginning, like introductory lesson to this long program God has had me in of
Mm.
how much I actually depend on the people around me.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that dependence being built in, that it is not a question of will I depend on people? It's a question of who am I depending on?
Mm-hmm.
Who am I blending my life with? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Who because that will shape me.
Mm-hmm.
And that, to be honest, Will, was a huge part of our decision to move to Kentucky. I love Compass. I'm passionate about it, but it's not the organization, it's the relationships.
Totally. Yeah.
And what we did see here that Zach honestly responded to more courageously, but he was decisive. He saw it and he knew it. He saw people who wanted to live life together.
Mm-hmm.
And we had experienced it just long enough and in this beautiful way that we now knew what it was like. We knew what we were missing, and we wanted to choose people around us who were also following Jesus.
So for those people out there who are listening to this and wondering, I'm an isolated Unitarian, there's this option here, that option there. I interact with people like this. I'm not regularly, but every once in a while, somebody will reach out and say, "Well, is there anything close to me?" And it's like, "Nope, there's nothing close to you." So
Oh,
it's like, what are the options? I know, we engage with Salt and Light, which you mentioned earlier, and Salt and
mm-hmm,
Light's still ongoing. And it's for those of you that are out there that are, looking for a community. It's a great online community. Meets on Tuesday nights, and just
yeah.
message me on Facebook. Let me know if you want more information. I can get you to the right people, to John and Anna, who still
Mm-hmm,
run it. But if people are thinking about following in the footsteps of what we're doing here and starting other faith communities, um, you know, I think what you're saying here is that there is an appropriate amount of caution in doing this
mm-hmm.
kind of an activity. It's not just that you can throw 10 different Unitarian families into a box and poof, out comes a beautiful community.
Right,
This,
right.
and we have people here that are filling very specific roles, and God clearly led them to fill those specific roles in our community. And it's not just that you can pick a random group of people and just roll. Um, so I think there is a reason to be concerned about the refining fire and concerned about the effort and intention it takes to build a community. But um, I would say that I would always encourage people to pray about it and to really strongly consider it because yes, it's a lot of work. Yes, it's a lot of emotional effort. Um, it means it changes your life. It changes the way that you live your day to day like normal
Yes,
life.
that's
Uh,
right. Well,
yeah.
and you know what? Here's the thing is I don't want to insinuate. I was actually left with a little bit of a worry. I don't want to insinuate that isolated believers are like less a part of the body of Christ. That is
Absolutely
not,
right.
I don't want to
Yep.
give any insinuation of that. I think God is incredible. I think he meets us where we are.
Absolutely.
I think sometimes he leads us to a place that's hard like that for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I do think that if we want to know what was the plan,
Mm-hmm.
what was the plan, the commission that Jesus gave his disciples and the way of life he had shown them for 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
it was in community.
Mm-hmm.
It was in community. And I think that that's what Tom Wright is talking about. He's saying, hey, we don't get to just say, I'll just take my direct line to Jesus, please.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's this whole, we are all made to be image bearers. And the
Mm-hmm.
way that we are refined into being a truer image bearer, which is to become more in the likeness of Jesus, who
Mm-hmm.
was the perfect image bearer,
Mm-hmm.
is to be near one another
Mm-hmm.
and doing life together. But the really difficult part of that is that what we do, the friction we create by living so close together, that becomes a refining fire.
Right.
Now, one of the beauties is that I learned at our church in San Diego that we're experiencing here is I think there's a connotation to that that some people could hear that sounds scary and abusive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not talking about control or someone setting me right with their incredible authority and knowledge of the Bible. No, it's actually the opposite. If we look at what Jesus did, he was washing his disciples' feet.
Mm-hmm.
He was serving them in love as they failed him.
Mm-hmm.
Then he went and he prayed for them. And when he could do nothing else for them, when his time with them was over, he didn't leave in anger. He wasn't disappointed in them. He returned them to his
Mm-hmm.
Father.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just this beautiful thing because I can tell you one of the hardest things about moving to Kentucky, delving into the community at Compass for me is that I know things end.
Mm-hmm.
I know things end. I know good, not always bad. This is the great news, guys. It's not always bad. We
Mm-hmm.
experienced it. We we were at a church in San Diego for 6 years. And when the end of that season came, we were sent away with love.
Mm-hmm.
It still hurts. It's still sad. I still ache for the day. Last night I was laying on the bed. Solomon brought me this little deck of conversation questions and asked if we could do them. And one of them said, if you could swallow a magic pill and have any wish come true, what would it be? And his wish was that Idaho and Coronado could be next to Louisville. And it's because there's a thing in me. I have it too. I just want to gather all the people I love together. And the really crazy thing about that is that that's exactly what Jesus wanted.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what his prayer is. And that what he was doing is he was showing the heart of his Father. What God has always wanted is to gather us all together,
Mm-hmm.
to be together. And what we have to do now while we wait for the kingdom where that comes in full is learn to do it in little pockets, which turns out is just about all we can possibly handle. But But here's the thing, the cost, whatever the cost is to join, to find community, and that could mean, yes, that could mean moving to a Unitarian community. That could mean that. That could mean finding a church of really wonderful Christians near you that doesn't share all of your doctrines.
Mm-hmm.
But God has things for you to learn there. That happened to us. I don't think it's the prescription, but I think it's an option.
Totally. Yeah.
I think it's an option, and I think we should be careful. And that's scary. I think there's wise ways to navigate that.
Mm-hmm.
But I know it can happen. And I do think that we're wise not to write off people who disagree with us as a scary they or other.
Yeah.
I think that we should stay tender and always reach out in the spirit of unity, in the spirit of Christ, seeking
Mm-hmm.
closer relationship. And that takes being willing to wash the feet of people that aren't very nice to you.
Right.
But you know what? When you find those bonds, that's incredible. Whatever it is, it's going to cost you something.
Mm-hmm.
Community is 100%, especially just the act, if it's not currently in your life, the act of deciding we will seek it. It will cost you time that you
Mm-hmm.
don't have to give right now. It will cost you energy. It will cost you risking getting hurt because community is indeed dangerous. It might cost you money and a job. It might. I don't know what God has for you, but here's the thing you should know. That is the beginning of what it's going to cost you.
Mm-hmm.
That is the beginning. Because in the community, that is where God will start that pruning process. Probably in a way, for me, this is my experience, in a way I had never experienced before. It was beautiful.
Mm.
It was transformative. I did parts of my old self that were there are now gone. And you know what? I don't miss them. It hurts to let it go, but once it's gone, you find freedom.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think there's a lot of sacrifice, and that's kind of what I was getting here. It costs you everything, and it's going to take your lifetime. We're not done.
Right.
We're never done.
Yep.
I think I felt weariness. If I'm honest, I think I felt weariness of, wait, it's not about this time. Wait, God, how many more times are you going to ask us to build community?
Yeah.
This is daunting.
Yeah.
And then I thought over the course of this year, I realized, what if it's a dozen? Would I say that's too much? Would I stop?
Mm-hmm.
I hope not. I hope not. I hope that I would keep following my rabbi wherever he goes. And I think that when we start doing that, I know that what I have watched happen in the last 6 to 8 months at Compass is this huge, it was slow. It's like this huge turning of attention, like of a posture.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we're all interested in growing individually.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that I've watched just get turned down is any competitive spirit in that growth.
Mm-hmm.
And this genuine desire and a beginning understanding that it is not just about how I grow or how you grow, Will,
Mm-hmm.
or how any individual here grows. It's also about what God is growing in this organism, this
Right.
little piece of the body of Christ that is Compass, and what he plans to do with us collectively.
Mm-hmm.
And that we fit together into more collections of people, and it gets wider and deeper over space and time. And that is the body of Christ that is being formed into being the image bearer
Mm-hmm.
that Jesus exemplified for us. And I think at the heart of bearing that image is love.
That's really great stuff, Amanda. You got to finish off the This Changes Everything series. I know you said earlier that you were been in John 13 through 17 for the whole year. How has the resurrection of Jesus meant more to you as we've gone through this series, and also just meditating and soaking in those 5 chapters in John?
There's one personal thing that really opened up for me in this past year, and then there's a collective thing that opened up for me watching this teaching series unfold, because I think there was something unique about this series and the way that it did unfold, at least as I see it. I think personally, if somebody asked me to name the sacrifice that Jesus made before, I would have said, well, he died for us. He
Mm-hmm.
suffered and died for us. And I don't want to, for a second, to discount that or the unbelievable,
Right.
life-changing reality of his resurrection. But I now see it fitting into this story of, of love. I think what Jesus gave us, he gave it to God. God created him with this purpose. He uniquely created him with this unique purpose. And this time, Jesus had a whole humanity to bear the image to as well. You know, when Adam was created, I have all these metaphysical questions. Actually, we could maybe have a whole different conversation, maybe not recorded for now. Um, but you know, the purposes that God had started in Adam, they were there in Jesus, but it grew.
Mm-hmm.
It grew. It deepened. Jesus, God turned his face toward Jesus. He was just there, present, waiting, watching, open. And Jesus looked up and didn't think he was at war with God.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't think he had to prove something to God. He didn't wonder. Maybe he did brief. I don't know if he wondered. He didn't believe or get tempted into believing that God was going to withhold anything from him.
Mm-hmm.
When I think about all the pruning that Jesus underwent during the course of his lifetime, all the good things, all the good directions in his life that it could have gone, that God asked him not to pursue,
Mm-hmm.
it is daunting to me.
Mm-hmm.
He gave his life day by day,
Mm.
moment of trust by moment of trust, building this love, this gentleness, this goodwill. And it culminated with him. He had every right, you know, he had every right. I think that's why Satan offered it to him. He had every right to take the throne.
Yeah.
And God asked him not to. And if you read John 17 closely, you'll see that he struggled with certain things. He struggled. He wanted his friends to see the culmination of the work that they'd helped him with.
Mm-hmm.
He saw what they'd given. He wanted them to understand him.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't. He wanted them to be with him. As far as we know, they're waiting for the resurrection, just like all of us will.
Yeah.
So there are things Jesus wanted that he didn't get. What he did get was perfect communion with God, oneness with God, knowing the love of God perfectly, and then choosing to let it spill out of him. So I see the sacrifice as like every moment of his life now.
Right. Yeah.
To this day,
Mm-hmm.
the trusting and the waiting.
Mm.
2,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it blows my mind. It makes the trust God's asking me for look a lot smaller. um, and it inspires me to want to become an embodiment of that kind of love. It's like I see now more an invitation to receive and participate.
Mm.
You know, Jesus gave his life, but like when I say those words, it means something different now.
Mm-hmm.
He loved us till we killed him. And then God raised him from the dead and he kept on loving us.
Mm-hmm.
Just the same. He's like, look, nothing's going to stop my love for you. And what he's doing is he's showing us how God's love is.
Right.
And so then for me, I'm like, yes, here it is. This is transformative. How do you begin to understand that and not really start to change? I hope that what happens for me in the next decade of my life is that kind of love starts really just pouring out. And that's scary for me to say.
Yeah.
But that's what I really want. And collectively, I saw something happen with this series. I had to come into an understanding of this is a process. This isn't
Mm-hmm.
a one-time thing. And that was a big deal for me because I'm a perfectionist.
What?
And shocking news, shocking news.
Alert the presses.
I'm a perfectionist in I'm being saved. I'm in process of being saved from that. But I had to come into this understanding, yes, this is a process. This is a lifelong process. And I wouldn't have laid it out this way. I wouldn't have used these words before this sermon series, but one by one, as we were like, yeah, let's talk about those 40 days Jesus was here on this earth after his resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
I think that what one of the many things God unfolded was this pattern of encounter and reconciliation and sanctification and transformation. An example of all of that in the life of Paul,
Mm-hmm.
not in one miraculous encounter. This was his encounter on the road. Like, we were able to name these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about the years of sanctification that Paul
Mm-hmm.
went through.
Yeah.
And then glorification.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would be a mistake to stop short of that. And I didn't start out thinking, let's talk about glorification. It really wasn't that. It was that, like, lifting up my eyes and seeing the beauty of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, I think many times in our life we're like, what for, God? What's the purpose? When does it end? Where is this going?
Right.
And the truth is, like, that is shown to us in the ascension of Jesus, in his resurrection and his full fellowship with God, and then the promise that he's coming back for us.
Mm-hmm.
It's for the kingdom. That's what it's
Mm-hmm.
for.
Yeah.
So for me, collectively, to watch our congregation, different people from our congregation, it was humbling and a wonderful reminder to be like, wow, look how God is working individually in all of us to build a collective understanding we need. We needed this in-depth illustration, and we didn't set out to give it to ourselves.
Right.
God did this for us as a gift in the work of the hearts of brothers and sisters in Christ that I get to learn from every day, but I got to learn from very specifically
Mm.
in them. And I also, I get to be close to some of the people who were teaching, you included, and I get to see what it costs people to learn these things and to turn around and teach them and to try to live them. And it's humbling
Mm-hmm.
and it's encouraging. I'm not alone in this.
Right. It was a cool process for me too. You think about, as a leadership body, we think about what do we need? What's the next thing? And most sermon series, I hate to say this, it's so funny, but I'm willing to admit it here. Most sermon series, I have one or two goals going into the sermon series, and I'm again an old
Mm-hmm.
educator, and I'm thinking about things in that frame, and so I'm like, this is sort of like a mini curriculum that we've got,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
I get ideas from different pastors. I get ideas from Victor Gluck, and I get things from Sean Finnegan. Jerry, my friend Jerry Werwol, you get these ideas from people, and then you're like, "Ooh, I'm gonna take a little bit of this. I'm gonna take a little bit of that. We're gonna sort of mix it together and see what kind of thing pops out." And
Mm-hmm.
usually, I have, like I said, one or two goals with the series. And what has been amazing for me, and this is not at all, this is not me patting myself or compass on, but this is like not something that I'm doing, is usually what God does is he takes my series and he's like, nope, we're gonna clip these couple things out. And oh, that's because we're gonna see it's gonna go a different direction than you thought it was
Different
gonna go.
direction.
It's gonna grow way more than you thought and in a different direction than you thought. And I think that happened
Mm.
with this series. Probably as much or more than any other series we've had to this point. Which was really, I mean, amazing that, in real time, God is showing us ways that we can grow and develop and change and even take the framework that we thought we were working with and understand that, oh, this is a platform for this conversation, this is a platform for that conversation. And I don't know, it's been incredible to me how God
Mm-hmm.
was so personal with us and with our little church and the things that we're learning right now and the things that we need. And so that's another encouragement for people who are thinking about starting their own Bible studies at home and think that's daunting, or who are thinking about their own church communities, that God is the God of the big and the small, and even our little
Yes.
church community has seen His hand guiding us in big ways and in small ways.
It's so true. It's really cool. And that's the kind of stuff, I don't there are times when I'm not sure. if I'm honest. Where's God? What's going on? I don't wake up every day and feel just gloriously close
Mm-hmm.
to God. But in community, I'm hearing from people on those days when I'm distant.
Yeah.
Wow, this is what God's doing in my life right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or watching as we're making plans one direction and God's like, nope, this way. And it's just absolutely incredible and inspiring to me. And I just think that it's easier to see, it's easier to accept, it's easier to endure the pruning in community.
I think you see more of the why in the community because sometimes it's easier to make those realizations about other people's life than it is about your life in the moment. You're like, oh yeah, I see this person. I see what's going on in their lives, see how God's working with them. And yeah, like this is an improvement. This is good. This is growth. And sometimes that's easier for you to see in someone else's life than for you to have that like reflection on your own life because we're all right. We all
That's right.
I'm 100% on God's team right now. And how dare you tell me
Yeah,
I'm not,
that's right. That's
Oh
right.
man, man.
Holy friction.
All right. Last question. What's one piece of advice that you would give your younger self about self-improvement or growth or transformation?
Well, I'll tell you, I wish I could go back and give myself one of Kurt Thompson's books that was only published this past year.
I know, isn't time traveling fun?
That'd be great. Boy, that would have. I had a desire. I've always craved community and spiritual community, but had such a hard time making it work for a long time because I didn't understand how God designed it to work. I didn't really get it. It's not the only framework. It doesn't need to be these words, but some of the language that Kurt Thompson uses. If you're interested or intrigued by this, I cannot recommend his book, The Deepest Place, highly enough. He has a lot of books and they're all really good, but if you're interested in community and you're asking yourself why community? He talks about in that book, Romans 5, and it's a very different approach that he takes when we're told that we can rejoice in our sufferings because suffering produces endurance and endurance produces character and character produces hope that does not put us to shame. He goes a little further back to the beginning of that chapter and he places context. He makes the argument that this was always meant to happen in community. And what I see there is this lifelong transformation that community is supposed to happen. And so he talks about some different things in that book, ways that this can happen, ways we can learn to be vulnerable, not just transparent, but like deeply vulnerable with each other. And there's some language, attunement, how to attune to someone else who's telling you their story instead of it, how to control what's happening in your mind because it's so easy to just go to your story, right? How to attune well, containment, how to build a community that can handle things.
Right.
That might be building a family, being a parent that can handle things. And then he talks about rupture and repair, and that cycle, the rupture and repair cycle, is really where we are transformed, where our minds are renewed. This is where we are rebuilt
Mm-hmm.
into the image of God. And that I think a lot of us avoid it because we don't want the hurt of the rupture.
Right.
But look, we live in a broken world. The ruptures will come.
Yep.
They will come. And so I see wisdom in engaging in healthy Christian community that is learning how to repair, that is
Mm-hmm.
interested in kingdom building, kingdom oriented relationships that are not based on never messing up,
Right.
that are not based on knowing enough or having a shiny enough life. Not at all.
Right.
That understands we're waiting in a broken world for a king that promised to come for us. That's what I would tell myself because I think a lot of the hurt in my early days came when I gave up for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I'll go it alone.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't take very long before someone actually said to me, it was very convicting, "Oh, you're a Christian? I never would have guessed that." realizing I wasn't who I thought I was.
Mm,
Knowing wasn't enough to be, that doesn't, knowing something doesn't make it part of my character.
right. Oh,
So that's what I would tell myself.
man. Well, thanks so much for this conversation, Amanda. It's been so much fun for me to engage with you on this today, but also just to have you all in the community. It's been wonderful. And in Zach, I gained not only another brother, but another golfing companion. So very, very thankful for that. Another excuse to get out of the house for like 6 hours and upset my whole family that I left behind. Oh, I'm just hanging out with Zach. It's okay.
Yeah, it's
Um, but no,
quality time.
that's right. But no, your whole family just brings a lot of strength to our community. And I know the kids in the community all admire your boys, and it's just such a sweet thing to see them all grow up together. And yeah, we'll see what tomorrow holds. No, like you said, nothing lasts forever, ever, on this side of the kingdom, and so we'll see where God leads. But um,
Right.
I'm enjoying what we have so far. So
Me
thank you
too.
so much
Me
for
too. And
being
we
with me
are,
today.
yeah, thank you, Will. And I just want to say, like, we have been so deeply blessed. It costs a lot. It cost you and your family a tremendous amount that we didn't talk about today.
Mm,
It costs a lot, but we have been so tremendously blessed, far and above anything that we've been able to invest in any part of our life. We are deeply blessed to be part of Compass,
mm,
and the lessons I learned this past year, I wouldn't have wanted to learn anywhere else.
mm.
So thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for bringing your strength to our community. I mean, these kinds of conversations are great for us to have in public, because I wasn't aware of a lot of the stuff until we started having these conversations, you and me. So now I get to share what's starting to come on my radar with everyone else and act like I'm an expert. Nope, I'm not the expert. That's why I had Amanda on the show today. So she can carry me up
Ah,
the hill. I'm on her back. She's just carrying me up the hill on this stuff. But
oh,
I
stop.
appreciate it.
No, no.
So yeah. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you, Will. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. I want to close by thanking Dave Tench for his musical contributions and Paula Ely for her help with design and editing. We'll catch you next time. Let's continue to follow Jesus together.